You're organising one of the UK's most important LGBTQ+ literary awards. Your longlist comes out, and within 48 hours, your inbox is flooded with withdrawal letters from your authors, angry emails from readers, and a petition with over 800 signatures demanding the removal of one book. This is what happened to the Polari Prize. This story matters because the Polari Prize isn't just a pretty blue sticker on the cover. A shortlist can mean Publishers Weekly coverage, agent inquiries, bookstore placement, and radio interviews. For debut authors especially, it's the difference between a sustainable writing career and obscurity. So when you have people walking away from that kind of opportunity, it's not just a symbolic show, it's a very costly statement. Author John Boyne is the spark of all this controversy, but it's not his long-listed book that people are angry about per se, it's more the inclusion of himself. He's been causing friction in bookish LGBT spaces since 2019, when his novel My Brother's Name is Jessica sparked criticism for his portrayal of a transgender character. But the current controversy centers on more recent statements, such as an April 2024 opinion piece where he wrote, "I don't consider myself a cis man, I consider myself a man," and a July 2025 article praising J.K. Rowling's view on transgender issues. So when his novella Earth appeared on the Polari long list, critics saw that as tone-deaf platforming. The organisers have defended Boyne's inclusion, citing literary merit, but many in the community reject this and see it as irresponsible of an institution to not weigh the harms that an individual's public statements can cause. Let me present, though, the strongest case for why some people, including some people in the LGBTQ+ community, thought that removing Boyne would be problematic. As one commentary put it, "The problem isn't the book, a compelling read that focuses on two football players charged with rape and accessory to rape, while touching on important themes. The problem is, if we start evaluating authors' personal opinions rather than the merit of their work, then where does it end? What happens when the next controversial author is someone whose politics you agree with?" Merit-based selection protects unpopular voices. And in a world where LGBTQ+ voices were historically silenced, surely that protection matters. Perhaps this approach is actually more beneficial to minority voices in the long run, because it prevents selection communities from becoming ideological gatekeepers and being able to make selective judgments about which opinions are acceptable to present to the world. But the counter-argument that resonated with hundreds of people, as we can see from the number of signatures, is that the Polari Prize isn't just any literary prize. It specifically exists to celebrate and amplify LGBTQ+ voices. And critics argue that by presenting John Boyne's stance as simply a different position within the LGBT community, then they are entirely ignoring the harm that those viewpoints can cause. From this perspective, is a merit-based approach really institutional neutrality then? Or is it a choice to prioritize one set of values of free speech and artistic merit over another of community safety and inclusive representation? When you're running an LGBTQ+ prize, I think you have a responsibility to consider whether platforming certain voices will cause upset to the people that you claim to serve. After all, the withdrawals were substantial. 7 of the 12 nominees for the First Book Prize, 4 of the 11 of the Book of the Year, and 2 of the judges all requested withdrawal. And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't just symbolic protest. For many, especially debut authors, this jeopardizes their career prospects. In Boyne's response, he said that the online backlash had pushed him, quote, "very close to the edge," and described the harassment as relentless. Despite this, he did make an offer to the withdrawing authors, asking that if they return, he would request judges not to consider Earth for the shortlist. Some called that gesture conciliatory, and others labelled it as a late PR move. I can easily see why Boyne would describe his experience as pushing him very close to the edge. Online pylons can be brutal, and people's mental health matters. But for many in the queer community, it didn't erase the harm that they felt from the stances he has voiced previously. This wasn't the first time that readers were worried about Boyne's portrayal of trans individuals, and that pattern matters when choosing to platform him for an LGBTQ+ prize. The coverage of this moved fast. The Guardian broke the initial wave of withdrawals, which gave the story national visibility. Then you had sites like The Week leaning more into the framing of like a scandal roiling the prize, which took the story into a broader culture war discourse. Then you had literary sites like LitHub and Brunch, almost tracking the news in real time, often quoting Jay Hulme's Blue Sky posts as newswires, and that kept the story relevant for longer. Interestingly though, the framing shifted depending on the outlet. Left-leaning and queer-focused publications tended to focus on trans safety and institutional accountability. Their headlines emphasized harm, solidarity, and the idea that platforming Boyne was incompatible with a prize for queer voices. By contrast, more centrist and conservative-leaning commentary placed greater weight on questions over free expression, literary merit, and whether boycotting amounted to censorship. This split matters. Inside queer literary spaces, the focus is on community boundaries. Outside those spaces, it often became a proxy battle over free speech and cancel culture. That difference in framing amplifies the row to people who wouldn't otherwise care about the Polari Prize itself, but who recognise the familiar fault lines from previous culture war clashes. Polari's statement ended up both apologising for the hurt and deciding to retain Boyne on the long list, alongside a pledge to review their processes. That balancing act only deepened the dispute. Most commentators called it an appeasement that changed nothing. I saw comment sections repeatedly suggesting fixes, such as making harm assessments part of selection criteria, involving a diverse range of community members in judging panels, providing an appeals process, and also publishing their review criteria. So what do we take from this? Firstly, that institutional decisions are never neutral. It's always a choice to prioritise one set of values. Secondly, we see the enormous impact of social media in creating institutional accountability. And finally, we can definitely see why it's important for institutions to consider their decisions carefully, because they can have a real impact on their community's trust. Here's what I find genuinely difficult about this case. I can see how a pure literary merit system is clean and fair. It removes human bias and protects unpopular voices. But I also can't ignore that the Polari exists specifically to amplify LGBTQ+ voices, and many in that community felt actively harmed by this decision. So maybe the real question isn't was this right or wrong, but it's more a case of how institutions should handle these competing values transparently. Should they publish explicit criteria, have community input, create an appeals process? Tell me, if you were redesigning the Polari Prize from scratch, what system would you use to balance artistic merit with community responsibility? I've linked the sources I've used to curate this video in the description. Feel free to give them a read. And of course, if you've got an opinion, I would love to hear it in the comments section below. If you'd like to see more of my videos on reading and writing especially, then feel free to subscribe. It'd be great to have you here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!